What's up, Suncrest On-Demand? You're watching episode 5 of our series, BitterSweet, the ups and the downs of the life of David. If you haven't caught the other 4 episodes, no worries. Find them on our YouTube channel right after this. Listen, this is premiering on the 4th of July, so here's the question. What's your favorite 4th of July tradition? Is it cooking out? Is it fireworks? Is it just being with your friends and family? Let me know in the live chat or comments. All right, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Maggie, and we're going to get rolling with this week's episode.
Hey y'all, I'm Maggie, and you're watching another episode of Suncrest On-Demand. Before we go any further, I'm sure someone is watching their first Suncrest On-Demand video. I'm super excited that you're here. Help me help you. Text the word Suncrest to 94,000. When you do that, we'll send you a digital gift card directly to your phone for some coffee, simply for getting this far in the video. Now, here's a tip for everyone watching. Make sure you have the Suncrest app. When you use our app, you get insider access to things like past content, upcoming events, stuff to help you, your kids, and your students engage with their faith journey, and much, much more. Actually, if you're looking to take a next step in your own faith journey right now, our app is the best tool to use. You can find the Next Steps button right on the homepage. Take a look right now to sign up for baptism, join a group to find your people here at Suncrest, or join a serving team and make a difference. In our app and on our website, you can also partner with us financially. Your generosity makes a huge difference in Northwest Indiana and beyond through starting new churches. So, on behalf of all of us, thank you for using your finances to change lives. Here's how the rest of this video is going to go. We're going to experience some music. In fact, let us know a lyric you found meaningful in the live chat or comments. We're going to experience communion. Each week we focus on the sacrificial love of Jesus through a simple meal. So, now's the time to gather some food and drink to represent Jesus' body and blood. After the song is done, I'm going to put up a timer on the screen. Feel free to eat and drink when you are ready. After communion is done, we'll listen to this week's message. Once that's done, let us know something meaningful you heard in the live chat or comments. Let's get going.
In this, episode 5 of David's BitterSweet life, we're going to explore something that's ultra important and ultra serious. I think as we think about this topic, it invites us, maybe even demands of us, that we approach it with a certain sober-minded seriousness so that we can listen to the voice of God as we experience it. This episode 5 is a significant piece of David's life, maybe a turning point like no other in his life. And of course, I've been wanting you to kind of capture the essence of what's bitter and sweet in David's life. And in the first 4 episodes, while there were a few tenuous moments, most of it has been sweet. Today, it turns bitter. And actually, the proper way to describe that is that because of what happens today, much of the rest of his life turns bitter. You know, we're titling these messages, and even just the titles of the messages over the next 3 weeks will give you an image of where this goes. Next week, we're going to talk about coming clean. The following week, it is my kids hate me. The week after that, it is facing accusations. And the whole trajectory of David's life that leads him to those places is what happens today. And of course, this isn't an academic exercise. I'm not just trying to enlighten you with a story of a man who lived 1,000 years before Jesus even lived. I'm wanting all of us to see how David's life that was bitter and sweet actually would help us take a look at our own lives with the same combination. And so before I get into his story today, I actually have a list of questions I want to ask you. They are a list of serious questions, a list that demands some sober-mindedness. And it's a chance, I think, if you'll allow for it, to take a look into your own soul, to think about your own conscience, to think about where the Spirit of God would be prompting you, and if you're open to it, to invite God to speak to you over the next few minutes. I want to talk to you about the temptations in your life and potentially about the sinfulness in your life. Now, I've never talked with a person who told me they were without sin. Jesus, the only person who ever lived who was without sin. The Apostle Paul, if you want to put it on the other end of the spectrum, called himself the chief of sinners. You're probably somewhere in between. But we aren't really led to think about these things all that often. And I think in part because we're not led to think about these things, we don't always handle them well. And if we don't handle them well, if we don't take the exit ramp from temptation when we have the chance, it actually leads us to a place that is marked with bitterness. And so I want us to have this conversation today. I'll read through these questions fairly slowly. Some of them may sound similar to one another. To some degree, I'm just kind of coming at the same ideas from some different angles. I'm just asking you to think about your life. The easiest thing someone does when they talk to me about their own morality or sinfulness is someone says, well, I'm not perfect, and then kind of brushes off whatever they're not perfect at. And today I just want to invite you into a conversation about your imperfection. So, what are the things that you've been doing wrong lately? Could we just be honest about them? Could you just be honest with yourself about them? When you say, I'm not perfect, what is it that's not perfect? If you're a follower of Jesus, we use this term sin. I know that word sin gets, probably misinterpreted a lot of times. It's not a big, scary word. It's just the idea of not doing what God asks me to do. Even if you're not a follower of Jesus, my guess is you would also say you're not perfect, and your measurement might be you don't even live up to your own standards. Fair enough. What are the things you've been doing wrong lately? The scriptures categorize sin for us in a way that's helpful and maybe a little bit scary, appropriately so, where they talks about the deadly sins. Maybe your sin is in this category. Lust, something of a sexual nature, pornography, adultery, sex outside of a covenant of marriage. Greed. Greed is probably the most culturally acceptable sin that we have. Greed just means all the stuff I have, I use it for myself. I don't use it to make the world better. I don't use it to build God's kingdom. I don't use it for the good of the world. I just use it all on myself. The love of money, chasing money. Pride. Pride causes us to look down our nose at other people. Pride keeps us from admitting our weakness or our fault or asking for help. Pride, one of the deadly sins. Gluttony. Gluttony is taking something that's okay in small doses and actually using it in excess. We call it retail therapy. That's actually gluttony. We know what happens with alcohol and addictions. We know what happens with food and overeating. Sloth. Nobody ever admits to being lazy. But sloth, the idea behind sloth is, I know there's something I should be doing and I'm not doing it. Almost everybody has that. I'm being lazy about that thing. Wrath. Does anger get the best of you? When anger starts to well up, do you lose control and explode? Is that your sin? Envy. The idea that I need to push somebody else down to lift myself up, that because I'm jealous of what they have, I try to undermine someone else. Envy. What are the things that you've been doing wrong lately? What are the things that you're considering doing wrong? You've been thinking about it. And you might. What are the things you keep doing wrong? You've done them wrong for a while now, and actually you don't have any intention to stop. Where are you justifying a behavior? When someone would start to call you on it, you'd be like, no, I have a good reason for that. It's not that bad. What are some things you used to feel guilty about, but that wore off? You've done them so long now, you don't even feel guilty about them anymore. What would you be ashamed about if it came out? It's kind of a secret right now. I don't know who you don't want to find out. Maybe you don't want your boss to find out. Maybe you don't want your wife to find out. Maybe you don't want your kids to find out. Maybe it would make you sick if you thought your pastor found out. What are the things you're hiding right now? If you're going to have an affair, have you pictured who it would be with? Do you know? Is it kind of obvious that it just pops into your mind? And where in life do you feel like God is not coming through for you? He is not delivering what you feel like you deserve. Where is that right now? You see, one of the things about being willing to take a look inward is we start to realize this can happen in a variety of settings in life. If you find yourself in a tough spot, if you're deep in debt, the question becomes, what would I compromise in order to get out of this situation? If you find yourself in a dull spot where life has just become blah, you start to ask yourself, what can I kick into gear? How can I spice it up? How can I have some feelings that I used to feel? And actually, if you're nailing it in life and it's success after success after success, which is actually David's story, there starts to be this sense of entitlement. That I have the world by the tail, I could probably get away with anything. I kind of deserve it. So, I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself today about where you're not perfect. And name it. Think about it. Bring it to mind. And I want you to think that when you're approached in those situations, when you have the opportunity to step into that or to step out of it, do you take the exit ramp or do you just keep driving toward the desire? So with that in mind, let me tell you David's story. So we've so far been exploring David's first early part of his life. He's been in his teens and his 20s. Conquered Goliath, was on the run as a fugitive. Last week, he took some good advice from Abigail to avoid, doing something horribly wrong. He actually becomes king then when he turns 30. He serves as king from the age 30 all the way to 70, so we have this 40-year reign. He's successful in everything that he does. He first becomes king of part of the kingdom, and by age 37, he's become king over the whole of the Israelite kingdom. There are kind of foreign adversaries that are still pressing into the kingdom, and by the time he's in his early 40s, he's essentially eliminated all of those adversaries, and he's become a king who loves God and is loved by the people. And in 2 Samuel 11, we get this story. It begins by saying, in the spring, when kings go out to war, because that is what happened. That's just the life people lived all the time. But then it tells us that the Israelites, David's army went out to war, but David did not go with them. He stayed back. The story says that he was up on his roof, which would have been the highest roof in the area. He gets up after an afternoon nap and he starts looking over the city below and he sees a woman. Her name is Bathsheba. And the verbs are very powerful here in the story. It says that he saw her bathing and then he sent for word about her. He wanted to learn who she was. And then he sent for her to bring her back to him. And then he slept with her. And it's worth noting, even in this story, that at each one of those progression points, he had the chance to exit. Okay, he saw her, right? We shouldn't pretend about this. I imagine it's probably true of ladies. I know it's true of guys, that there's a visual element to who we are, and there's an attraction when you see someone beautiful, if you see someone naked. Seeing her was not the problem. The question is, after you see her and you start to feel this desire, you start to feel this temptation, what do you do with that? Do you exit or do you just keep going? He found out that she was the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Uriah was one of the men who fought in his army. And even after finding out that she's married to one of the guys who's out fighting for David, he says, you know what, maybe that's an advantage, not a disadvantage. And he calls for her to come. After he slept with her and committed adultery, word comes back to him that she's pregnant. What do you do at this moment? Do you decide to come clean? Do you say, man, I'm on a bad path. I got to exit. I got to get off this path. Or do you think, this is going to look bad. I got to hide it. I got to figure out how to solve it. Well, that's exactly what David does. So David actually decides that he's going to send a messenger to go get Uriah the Hittite off of the battlefield. The idea is if I can bring him home, he sleeps with his wife. Nobody's really going to do the math. Everyone will just think it's Uriah's baby. No problem. That's not going to work if he was off fighting when she's having the baby. So he brings Uriah back and he encourages Uriah to go spend the evening with his wife, but Uriah doesn't do it. He actually won't leave essentially the steps of the palace of David. And David says, no, go home. And Uriah looks at David. Can you imagine this moment? Uriah looks at David and says, no, I won't go be with my wife. My buddies are out fighting on the field. I got to be faithful to them. You've sent me out to the field. I got to be faithful to you. I'm a faithful, loyal guy, David. I'm staying here. What does David do? The story tells us that the next night he got Uriah drunk. He just can't stop. He can't find the exit ramp. He can't come clean. He can't do it right. He just keeps going. Gets Uriah drunk. Thinks if I get him drunk, he'll go home and he'll sleep with his wife. He got him drunk. He did not go home and sleep with his wife. And so when David realized he's not going home to sleep with his wife, David actually thinks, what's next? He writes a letter. He writes a letter actually telling his commander, Joab, to send Uriah out to the front lines of a battle so that Uriah will be killed. He writes the letter, seals the letter, puts the king's seal on it so nobody would open it, gives it to Uriah. to carry back. Uriah hands it to Joab. Put yourself in Joab's shoes at this stage. You got a king who's been noble and honorable, and you do anything that he asks, but he just sent you this note. Now you're in this position all because of David's stuff. But he does what David says. And he sends Uriah to the front lines. Uriah is killed, along with other men. And they send word back to David. Mission accomplished. Bathsheba mourns for a short time and then moves into the palace. And I just want you to think about David's life, but actually what I want you to think about is your life. And think about how temptation works. And the opportunities temptation provides for you to keep going or to exit. So let me just describe this a little bit. Maybe you'll resonate with some of this from the things that you're doing wrong right now. Temptation is conflicted. It presents both a warning and an invitation. Whenever, you know what temptation feels like, right? You can feel it inside. And when you feel it, it's this conflicted thing that says, yeah, you probably shouldn't. You probably shouldn't. This seems wrong. You have a moral compass inside of you. And at the same time, the whole idea of temptation is you want to. You want to. And it is that desire, that sense that I need to fulfill all the desires inside of me. You might even think, it's a desire inside of me. Maybe this desire is from God. It feels very natural to me. And it's just this conflicted thing. In Genesis chapter 4, it's described like this. It says, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? The chance to exit off the sinful path. Man, go do what's right. It's going to be fine. David, you're still the king. Your family's in order. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, and it desires to have you. You must rule over it. Perhaps we all should pay a little more attention to the temptation in our life and think that even though it seems desirable, this is coming with a pre-packaged warning. Here's another thing that temptation is. Temptation is deceptive. It actually likes to confuse what is right and what is wrong. See, maybe this will be helpful to you today. There's a lot of life that's very confusing. There are so many decisions to make in life that are confusing, that are not black and white. They're full of gray. They're judgment calls. You have to discern them. All of that is true. So, since so much of life is complicated, one of the best gifts that God has given us is he said, within that, there are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. You don't have to think about them. They're not gray areas. You don't have to look at something that's wrong and think, but maybe it's right. But people do this, of course, all the time. We do it on the front end. I don't know if you remember this, but the very first temptation that we have of humanity is with this serpent image in the Garden of Eden that represents Satan. And the question he asks to Adam and Eve about not eating from the fruit of the tree is, did God really say that? That's the question. And it's so tempting when there's a desire inside of us. We think, did God really say that? Did God really mean that was right and wrong? He did. And in these right and wrong places of life, it's time to stop calculating and just do what's right and not what's wrong. The other place that this right and wrong gets confused is not just on the front end where we're like, did God really mean that? But it's actually on the tail end where we have something we're trying to accomplish and we believe that the end, which we can describe as good, justifies the means, which are cutting corners, dishonest, cheating. And I just want to ask you to listen to the wisdom of Isaiah. Woe to those who call evil good and who call good evil. Temptation is progressive. See, you can actually chart this out in David's story. It went from desire to temptation. And then it went from temptation to sin. And then it went from sin to death. And I think part of beating this battle of temptation for all of us and not ending up in a place that's marked with bitterness is paying attention to the progression. It's Jesus who said this. He said, "For out of the heart come evil thoughts." This is where it comes from. There's these desires, and it feels like it's natural. It feels like it comes from within you. And again, in our world today, a lot of people think the idea is this: well, if it feels like a natural desire, God made me that way, so I should fulfill it. And what Jesus is constantly telling people is, no, that's not the way it works. There are things that are inside of you, desires that come from the heart. But where do they end up? They end up with death, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander. This is the result. And then it's almost like James, Jesus' brother, who's writing a little bit later on, is taking David's story into account and what Jesus said right here, and he kind of like double clicks on it and blows it up a little bit. And this is the way that he describes it. He says, "Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed." Now, I just want us all to be honest about this. Can we just be honest in the room? You're not tempted to do things that don't feel good. You're not tempted to be with people who don't look good. You're not tempted by, you're tempted by these things that are enticing, that are desirable. I have a pastor friend of mine, you may have heard me say this before. He says, if your sin isn't fun, you're doing it wrong. Because it looks appealing. It has a seductive nature to it, and not just sexual sin. It starts to help you imagine, oh, what if? But if you can pay attention to the idea that you have desires inside of you that aren't all healthy desires, and that desire will lead you to a place of temptation. But then after that desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. So this is the line. Desire, you have evil desires, but there's nothing wrong with having the desire. Temptation, that desire comes after the temptation. And it was, no big deal that David saw Bathsheba. But this is the moment for the exit ramp. That when I can step back and I say, but it's not right. I know it would feel good. I know there's something I desire. I know there's something I want. I know it would be fun. But it's not right. And I want to be a person who does what's right. I want to be a noble person. I want to be a person who does what's right in the eyes of God. And I want to be a person who honors the people around me. Because if it goes from desire to temptation to sin, and when sin is full grown, it gives birth to death. Now, you might think he's being too dramatic. I'm promising you he's not. Because sin is not just a list of things that go wrong, a list of things you do wrong. Sin is always relational. It always, I know you're at different spots in life. Some of you have lived this story. Sin killed the marriage. Sin killed the relationship with your kids. Sin killed the trust between two people. Sin killed the integrity that you once had. Sin killed the dream of where life could be. And if you haven't experienced it yet, I just ask you to take David's life as a warning. That life progresses from desire to temptation to sin to death. And if you do not exit, that's where it's going. You see, temptation is high stakes. There are winners and there are losers. I'm going to read you just parts of 3 different verses, kind of at the end of David's story. And I want you to think about this with me. This is from where David sent word to Joab. Joab put Uriah out. Of course, he couldn't send Uriah by himself, so other guys had to go with him. Some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. This is the direct damage that happens when you choose to cover up instead of clean up. People who you know, people who are right around you, pay a price when the sin comes to light. So there's this kind of direct damage of people right around you. Then this is actually the very last verse of the chapter. It says, the thing David had done displeased the Lord. So there's a horizontal problem. Uriah, other people in the army, they all died. There's also this vertical problem with God. And I don't for a moment want you to underestimate how important it is to God that you do the right thing. Like, this isn't a casual thing, like, well, he'll kind of take care of it later. It's probably no big deal. Lots of people do this. There is a holiness to who God is. And for those of us who've become followers of Jesus, we've experienced the forgiveness of all of our sin and a cleansing, and we know the price that was paid, which was Christ on the cross. Sin. Whatever sin is part of your life, whatever sin is part of my life, it displeases God. And I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to help you. Because for you to have a life-giving relationship with God where you can talk to him in the morning and you can listen for his voice and not think, you know what, he's probably mad at me. I mean, Now, in David's story, just a little heads up for next week, David's relationship with God ends up getting good news because of a great friend and coming clean. This part of his story, man, come back next week if you think God would give up on you. But in the story that shows up in the next chapter, this is what it says. David, the sword will never depart from your house. And here's the thing. As we read the rest of David's story, because he didn't take the exit ramp when he saw her, because he didn't take the exit ramp when he sent for her, he didn't take the exit ramp after he slept with her, because he didn't take the exit ramp. He just kept going. His kids are going to hate him. Joab, you know, his commander who he completely trusted and had to send Uriah, later on in the story, Joab's going to turn on him. The baby he wants to have with Bathsheba is going to die. It all goes wrong. And see, I care about you. I really do. Even if I don't know you, I promise you I care about you. And one of the things that is maddening to me about sinfulness is that while you can come clean with God and experience forgiveness with him, it doesn't take away the consequences. Trust still died. Relationships still died. Dreams still died. And they don't come back. You know, it's so powerful to me because let me just describe to you 3 different pastoral conversations I've had sitting in groups of guys before. I've had a conversation where in a group of guys, a guy speaks up and he says, like David, I messed it all up. I was on a course. We know how this goes. She laughed at my jokes. I started texting her. Seemed like it was just flirting, harmless flirting. I mean, what do they say, right? Just because you've already ordered, doesn't hurt to look at the menu. And then it became something more and more and more, and I lost it all. And my kids don't respect me. I've been in that circle. I've been in the circle where the guy says, I was attracted to her. She laughed at my jokes. I texted to her. And then we were on a trip, and I slept with her. And the regret was so strong that I had to come back and just confess to my wife. And it wasn't pretty, of course, but it was honest. And while I wish the exit ramp had been a little bit earlier, the exit ramp was there. It happened. And a family held together. And actually, the kids never learned about it. And I've been in a circle of guys where one guy I respect this about guys that are willing to say this, just says, hey, just so you guys know, last night I was kind of flipping through TV and had the option. Like, it was right there. I was in the room alone. I had the chance to watch something I knew I shouldn't be watching. I knew I didn't want my wife to walk in the room. I knew it. And so I moved off of it. But I just need to tell you guys this, because that is my fight. There's a real desire and a real temptation, and I'm trying to keep it from becoming a sin. And I think, oh, it's so powerful. Because ultimately, temptation is prompting. Temptation is an invitation and a warning. And I don't know what it is in your life. I don't know if it has to do with money, or if it has to do with sex, or if it has to do with pride, or it has to do with excess in your life. I don't know. But whatever it is, I'm asking you not to play with it. Not to skip this exit. But take the exit. Because you can't put the things of life back together when you don't.
Take it back. I would take it back. Just another minute, just another chance with you. Give it up. I would give everything up, every last breath, every first taste for you. Just to make it all right, just to make it all right. But it's too late to go back. I can see the darkness through the cracks, daylight fading. I curse the breaking. The day is gone. The day is gone. Run away. I'll just run away like a child from all of them to you. Now I see my most constant mistake is I don't know what I love until it's gone. But it's too late to go back. darkness through the cracks, daylight fading. I curse the breaking. The day is gone. The day is gone. Well, it's too late to go back. I let the darkness seep through the cracks. Love is bleeding. I curse my breathing. The day is gone. The day